And so what I want to do for the next few weeks, I guess 7 weeks total, right? We're going to look at each day of the week, and leading up to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ, we're going to be looking at every day of that final week. And so what we're going to look at this morning is that first Sunday. So this would be the Sunday before the resurrection. And the defining thing that took place on this day was the triumphal entry of Jesus Christ. If you got your Bibles, open up now to the book of Mark. Mark chapter 11, and I'll meet you there in just a second. Mark chapter 11, and that's where we're going to be taking the story of the triumphal entry away from as we try to detail the last week of Christ. Now, Mark chapter 11, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to just look at the story. All right, we're going to go through this story together, and we're just going to tell it as if we were telling it to somebody that never heard it before. Then what we're going to do is we're going to back up, and we're going to get the meaning and the significance of just what that triumphal entry is, and then we're going to take away some application. Now, before I do that, I guess I need to preface this by saying, the triumphal entry has always been an interesting one to me. Because if you don't really understand what it is that you're reading, and say that you're just reading along in the New Testament, I'm sure there's folks here this morning that read their Bible on a daily basis. Maybe there's even somebody here this morning that tries to read an entire Bible in a year. Fantastic. But say you're reading along and you're flipping along through the Gospels, and then you come up to the triumphal entry and you think, well, that's kind of a strange story. What does the triumphal entry have to do with the life of Christ? And we see Jesus walking everywhere he goes, but now he chooses to ride a donkey, not just a donkey, the colt of a donkey, a very short distance. You see, if you don't understand the significance of that, you're going to miss the point, and you're really going to miss the application. Let's dive right into it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the story together. Look there in Mark chapter 11, and look at verses 1 through 3. It says, "As they approached Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, 'Go into the village opposite you, and immediately as you enter it, you'll find a colt tied there.'" Now, it doesn't, in Mark's account here, it doesn't tell us what type of colt, it just says a colt, "on which no one yet has ever sat. Untie it, bring it here. And if anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' you say, 'The Lord has need of it,' and immediately he'll send it back here." Now, it says there in Mark's account, it has the words Bethany and Bethphage, or Bethphage and Bethany. You see, that's where they were coming from. They were coming from Bethany, and they had been in Bethany because they were visiting the house of Lazarus, whom they had risen from the dead, whom Jesus had risen from the dead. Oh, man. There we go. I swear I pushed the right buttons. This did this to me on my tryout Sunday, by the way. Casey's laughing at me over there. I pushed the right button in my defense. And then the screen just went blank. So Casey might be trying to sabotage me. I got it working now, all right? John chapter 12, verse 1. It tells us, "Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead." And so that's where they were. And if you're looking at the map, you can see here, this is Jerusalem outlined in brown, and you can see the temple there outlined in red. Bethany and Bethphage over here, and you can see it's a very famous travel route, by the way, coming in on this side of Jerusalem and on that side of the temple. More on that as we go through the last weeks of Christ, more specifically the cleansing of the temple. We'll get to that more in future lessons. But as you can see there, they're in Bethany, and they're coming through, and Bethphage is the city where Jesus said, "Go, and you're going to find a colt tied there." So as they're coming into the city, he asks and requests for that colt. But notice this, okay? And I said this just a second ago. Jesus walked pretty much everywhere, didn't he? Look how close Bethphage is to Jerusalem. I mean, you're talking just a few miles. Why would he all of a sudden say, no, I don't want to walk that little short distance. You're go into Bethphage. He sends a couple of disciples, said, "You're going to go find a colt there. Bring that colt to me. That's how I want to finish this journey." I'm sure the disciples were thinking, why? Why would you want a colt? Why don't we just keep walking? We're going to figure that out here in just a minute. But that's the distance or the direction that they're coming in from the city. So it says Bethphage and Bethany. That is the significance of where they're coming in. But he says, you're going to find a colt And Casey, I just realized, I meant to correct this morning. It says you'll find a cold. That's meant to say colt. I saw that this morning, and I thought to myself, I need to tell Casey about that so I can get that corrected. That's my brain, by the way. So I'm sorry, y'all. That's what y'all hired. All right. It says you'll find a colt, okay? Now, in John's or in Matthew's account, it tells us exactly what type of colt. If you read Mark, it just says a colt. Well, Matthew says that it's a colt of a donkey, okay? Now, it also says of that colt of a donkey, on which no one yet has ever sat. Has anybody just decided out of a whim, maybe there's not many people here, to just throw their leg over a colt that had never been ridden before, like a horse colt? It's not pretty, and especially a colt of a donkey, a young donkey that had never been ridden before. It's especially not pretty. It's not hard. It's not easy to do. And by the way, this idea of jumping on a donkey that never been ridden before, that's actually how I got my start in bronc riding. For those of you that don't know, I rode saddle bronc for about 15 years or so. I started when I was 15 and I rode up until I was 30. Well, I was like 13, 14 years old, and the guy that worked for us helped us on occasion on our ranch, he called me one day, and because I was like a 13-year-old kid, he's like, hey, I've got this donkey that I can't get broke. And he said, why don't you come over here and help me? And it was in this round pen that's just like, it was muddy, it had been raining a bunch, and I had on rubber boots, and there's like all kinds of sharp stuff sticking out of the round pen everywhere. And looking back, I know why he did it now. Now I'm looking at like 13, 14-year-old kids that helped me move, and I'm like, hey, get in there and get that piece of furniture. But, you know, he just said, yeah, go jump on his back. No halter, no nothing. And I just went and jumped on his back. Well, he bucked me off a bunch of times, and I had fun doing it, and I thought, you know, I could do that more often. And that's how I got started, by the way, which is not a very good start. But, so, Jesus asked for this colt of a donkey, one that nobody had ever ridden on before. And so, that right there has some significance. More than likely, Jesus being the master of all creation, being able to ride that donkey. Let's move on in the story. Now look at verses 4 through 8. It says, they went and found a colt tied at the door outside in the street, and they untied it. Some of the bystanders were saying to them, what are you doing untying the colt? They spoke to them just as Jesus had told them, and they gave them permission. And they brought the colt to Jesus and put their garments on it. And he sat upon it, and many spread their garments in the road, and others spread leafy branches which they had cut from the fields. All right, let's break that down just a little bit. First thing it says there that I want to point out on is it says that they take their coats and they spread them on the road before Jesus, where Jesus was walking. I don't know if you've ever seen hoofs of a donkey. They're really small, and usually they're really sharp. And more than likely, this road that they're on is not like a nice, clean, smooth, paved road. More than likely, it's just gravel, where you take a bunch of rocks and you break it up, boom, you got a road. What they're doing is they're taking their clothes off, their coats off, laying it down before a donkey, knowing that it's going maybe not destroyed, but you're going to hurt the garments in some way. And you have to put yourself back in their shoes 2,000 years ago. Garments were hard to come by. Coats were hard to come by. Especially if you were a Jew living in Jerusalem, whatever piece of garment you had, you hung on to that and you made it last as long as you possibly could. Here we have Jesus Christ sitting on a donkey and people willing to take their coats off and throw it down on the road, a rocky road with a colt of a donkey coming by, Jesus Christ sitting on it. Willingness to give up something that they treasured and possessed for Jesus Christ. Now that has some significance, and we're going to get to that more later, but this is the story, okay? They take their coats and they spread it on the road down in front of Jesus, and then they take what's called leafy branches. Mark's account says leafy branches. Well, John's account tells us exactly what leafy branches. It says that of palm trees. They took palm tree branches and spread them down on the road. Now again, there's going to be some significance there, and we'll talk about that more here in just a little bit. So they spread the palm branches, they spread the coats out on the road as Jesus is coming by. And now notice in verse 9. There we go, verse 9. And those who went before and those who followed after were crying out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Notice that it says there, if I can get my clicker to work, those who went before and those who followed. You ever picture that in your mind? In the triumphal entry, Jesus is sitting on this donkey, and there's people in front of him going on before him. What does that tell you? It tells you their backs are to him. If I was in front of Jesus would be behind me on that donkey, and I would be going out in front of him. That kind of gives you the picture of them leading Jesus into town, doesn't it? But then there's also, it says people following, so going behind him, shouting and crying out. It's a procession of some kind. So there's people in front of Jesus, and there's people behind Jesus. Not only that, it says that they were shouting, Hosanna. Man, we're killing me here. Hosanna, which means literally save now, or oh save. The Hebrew word for Hosanna is the same word found in 2 Samuel chapter 14 in verse 4. 2 Samuel 14 and 4, there we go, got it on the screen. Now when the women of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and prostrated herself and said, Help, O king. That's what the word Hosanna means. And so get that picture in your mind. Jesus Christ is sitting on that donkey, and they're coming into Jerusalem, and people are taking their coats and laying their coats out on the ground. People are going out and cutting palm branches and bringing the palm branches back and laying them before Jesus, and following after with those palm branches in their hand, crying out, Help, O King. Notice what else they're saying. They're saying, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. If you ever read your New Testament, and you see the letters all capitalized like that, some Bibles will do this for you. They'll capitalize all the words. That's because they're quoting from some other place in Scripture. And in this part right here, they are quoting, as they're following and shouting after Jesus, they're quoting after Psalm chapter 118 and verse 26. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. You know what the significance of that verse is? That was a psalm that was written about Moses and God delivering the children of Israel out of Egypt. And you see what they were doing is they were shouting Psalm 118 verse 26 behind Jesus as they're carrying those palm branches, in a sense of saying, deliver us. Not from the hands of the Egyptians like they did when Psalm 118:26 was first written, but from the Romans. And you see, that's what the children of Israel didn't understand. More on that here in just a little bit. But now look at verse 10. Verse 10 of Mark 11 says, Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is the coming kingdom. You see, the kingdom is something that should not be taken lightly. Especially the idea of the kingdom. See, the kingdom had been prophesied all throughout the Old Testament. People had been waiting for this coming kingdom all throughout the 400 silent years between Malachi and Matthew. And when Jesus came, and during his ministry for 3 years, Jesus would speak the most about the kingdom. The kingdom is at hand. The kingdom is at hand. And he would tell parables. The kingdom of heaven is likened unto this. The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man who found a costly pearl. And so Jesus would speak so much about the kingdom. It was prophesied of. Daniel 2:44, the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. The days of those kings, that's talking about Roman kings. He says in those days the kingdom's coming. Well, you know the Jews had to know that. They know they're in the days of those kings. Not only that, Jesus would pray such things as, "Thy kingdom come, your will be done." And so the idea of the coming kingdom was fresh on everybody's mind. It's what they're thinking about. It's what they're looking towards. And so when they see Jesus coming into town, riding on that donkey, and they lay their coats down before that donkey, and they take palm branches, and they go cut them off, and they bring them back, and they lay them before the donkey. And they're walking out ahead of him with their backs to him. And they're following him behind him, and they're all shouting, "Save, O King! Help us, O King!" And they're shouting and saying, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. a reference to Moses bringing them out of Egypt. And they're saying, blessed is he. Oh, my chapter slipped over. Sorry. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. You see, what they were looking for was a physical king in a physical kingdom. And when they saw Jesus coming into town on that donkey, that's what they thought they had. Because as we look at the meaning of this, we realize that Jesus riding in on that donkey and the triumphal entry was a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. Zechariah chapter 9 and verse 9. 500 years before Jesus Christ would make that triumphal entry into Jerusalem. 500 years. By the way, America's only been a country for a couple of hundred years. So you think for 500 years, they had been looking for somebody who was going to fulfill this prophecy. Read this with me. It says, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He's just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even a colt, the foal of a donkey. You see, for 500 years, they were looking for the king that was coming to them. For 500 years, they've been looking for this sign right here. And Jesus, in Bethany, go back to the map, back in Bethany, he had already raised Lazarus from the dead, performed so many miracles. And as he comes into Jerusalem, that's why he told them, go get that donkey. I'm going to finish this short little trip out from Bethphage to Jerusalem because I want them to know that I'm the king. I'm the one you've been looking for 500 years. I'm the one who fulfills this prophecy right there. That's why he told them, go get a donkey. He didn't just say, go get me something to ride. He said, go get me a colt. And more specifically, according to Zechariah 9:9, he said, the colt of a donkey. Why? Because in Jesus' mind, I need to fulfill this prophecy, and I'm going to let all of Jerusalem know that I am the king that you've been waiting for. So it's a fulfillment of prophecy. But as we try to think about the meaning of the triumphal entry and the interpretation of it, I want you to think about the crowd and what they're doing from the crowd's perspective. The first thing that we see them doing there is we see them taking their coats off and laying them down on the street in front of the donkey. And when they laid their coats down, that was symbolism. 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 12 and 13 says this. They said, it is a lie. Tell us now. And he said, thus and thus he said to me, thus says the Lord, I have anointed you king over Israel. See, when they heard those words that Jesus Christ had anointed Jehu as king, it says there they hurried and each man took his garment and placed it under him on the bare steps and blew the trumpet saying, Jehu is king. So why did they take their coats off and lay their coats before the donkey? Because they knew that Jesus Christ was their coming king. And so they were taking their garments off and they were laying them down on that road, shouting, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. This is our king. That's why they took their coats off. But then think about why they would take those branches, those palm branches, and go out and cut those palm branches out and bring them back and lay the palm branches at the feet of the donkey. And why they would be following Jesus with those palm branches in hand, shouting, Hosanna. Well, you got to think back to Roman times. You see, the Romans in their culture, they would have games and competitions. And they would have competitions in the gladiator ring. And then whenever somebody would win something in the ring, they would win some sort of competition, they would take a palm branch. And they would give that palm branch to the victor, to the person who was won, symbolizing victory. And so you see what they were doing is they were taking their coats off and laying them before the donkey, symbolizing the fact that Jesus is the crowned king. But they were taking palm branches and laying them before the donkey, symbolizing victory as a king. Now, they were also shouting, Hosanna, meaning save us. But did that crowd really understand what they were being saved from? Because that exact same crowd not too long ago, if you skip just a couple of chapters ahead in Mark chapter 11, you go to Mark chapter 15, you'll find that same crowd crying out, "Crucify him." Because they were expecting a king that was going to come in and free them from the Romans. They weren't expecting a king who was going to come in there and save them from sin. They thought they had a physical king who was going to save them from another physical kingdom and establish another physical kingdom and give them physical salvation. And then they shouted, "Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David." Again, they did not understand the kingdom that they thought that Jesus Christ was coming to establish. They thought he was coming to establish a physical kingdom. Which now brings me to the perspective of the king. You see, Jesus Christ, going back to that story and thinking back of the significance of the crowd being not just behind Jesus, but also in front of Jesus. They were in front of him with their backs to that donkey as they were going out and shouting, "Hosanna," and shouting, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." What the significance of that is it was a victory procession. You see, what kings would do back in those days, as a king would return back from war and from battle, when the king would come back into town with his army, the town there would have a victory procession for the king. Most of the time, they would send somebody out on ahead of the king and tell them the king is coming. Make the procession ready. Well, as Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, they see him coming, and a large crowd was gathered there already because of the raising of Lazarus. And that crowd saw Jesus Christ coming, and they gave him a victory procession as a king returning back from battle. That's the significance of the triumphal entry. But when you think about it from the perspective of the king, and a king that would be coming back from battle, you see that he would get off of the normal horse that he was riding, and they would have a special horse for him, just for that last mile or two as he was coming into the city. It'd be a horse that would be the most beautiful horse, and a saddle, the most shiniest and beautiful saddle you've ever seen. And they'd be saving that horse for that last mile or two, for whenever a king would be coming back and entering back into that city. And then he would get on that beautiful horse with a beautiful saddle. And then they would have this victory procession where the king would be having palm branches laid at his feet. But you see, Jesus wasn't sitting on a nice shiny saddle. He was sitting on an old garment. You see, somebody took their coat off and laid it on that donkey, and that was what Jesus sat on top of that donkey. And he wasn't sitting on some beautiful white stallion. He was sitting on a donkey, and even that, the colt of a donkey. You see, what that symbolized was Jesus held that victory procession as a king. He made it known to Jerusalem. He said, in doing that, he said, "I am your king." But he said, "I'm not the king you think I am. I'm not going to sit on some beautiful white stallion. I'm not going to sit on some nice shiny saddle. I'm going to sit on a colt of a donkey." That symbolized the humility that Jesus would bring into the world. It symbolized the type of king that he was going to be. Matthew 10:45, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." That's the type of king that our king is, a humble king. Matthew chapter 2 and verse 8 would say, "Being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." And so you see, he wasn't the type of king to ride in on a beautiful, pompous horse. He was the type of king that would be humble and ride in on a donkey and humbly go to his death. So as we think about the last week of Christ, and the week that's going to lead up to the death of Jesus Christ, it began with the victory procession of the king to come. And in that victory procession, Jesus Christ would ride into Jerusalem. And they would be laying their coats down, symbolizing the coronation of the king. They'd be laying palm branches down, symbolizing the returning victory of the king. But they misunderstood that king. Because just a few chapters later, they'd be crying out, crucify him. So here's the application I want us to take away from this morning. You see, the Jews misunderstood what type of king that Jesus really was. We can misunderstand what type of king Jesus is still to this day. Many will say to our king on that judgment day, Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. And so you, 2,000 years later, can still misunderstand what type of king that Jesus is, He currently is reigning. Maybe you misunderstand him as a detached king. Somebody who does not really truly care about what goes on in the church. You know, that's the idea of true godliness. True godliness is you living your life every single day with the realization that Jesus Christ is with you and He sees you. And He's with us right now and He sees us. Do you see Jesus Christ as a detached king? Would you worship Him differently if He was standing up here at the front of the auditorium? Would the songs be sung louder? Would the prayers be more fervent? Would we be more attentive to the lesson that was given if Jesus Christ was actually physically standing up here? Well, you know what? He is. And so we may be 2,000 years removed from the triumphal entry, but you can still misunderstand the type of king He is. He's not a detached king. He is and currently ruling and watching us and seeing us and looking at our heart as we fervently worship Him and live for Him. Do you think of Him as an unworthy king? As an unworthy king? You may say that Jesus Christ is the most important person in your life. But do your actions show it? If Jesus Christ is the most important person to you, then let your speech be that way. Let the way you treat other people in this world show that. And again, we may be 2,000 years removed from the triumphal entry, but you can still misunderstand Jesus as the type of king He is. He is worthy. Revelation chapter 5 and verse 12, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. Jesus Christ is worthy. And so on the first Sunday, as Jesus would ride back into Jerusalem, that marks the final week of Jesus Christ. And tomorrow we're going to be looking at Monday, and then Tuesday after that, and we'll walk our way through the last week of Christ, Lord willing. But I have a question for everybody this morning. If you know that Jesus Christ is King, are you in the kingdom? Jesus Christ would say in John chapter 3 and verse 5, truly, truly, unless you're born of water and spirit, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. If you're not in the kingdom, that is the church, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. If anybody is not a part of that kingdom, you can make your soul right with God this morning. You can become a child of God this morning. The water is ready, and you can be added to the church. You can be added to the kingdom that Jesus Christ triumphantly rode into Jerusalem to establish. If anybody has any need this morning, please come now as we stand and as we sing.